Okay.
Okay. Wait, let me share screen. Forgot to do that. There we go. Everyone see the screen? Okay, so
Yes.
welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to go deeper. We're going to sidetrack from what we were doing and leave the Mishneh Torah of Maimonides in order to study the topic of the image of God, which we started last week. We're going to study it a little bit deeper. All right, we're going to go into some of his other works. We'll go over some of the things that we already mentioned and also see a few things in the guide for the Perplexed that Maimonides wrote. And we'll also venture into, if anyone has heard of the Sefer Kuzari of Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, about 2 generations before Maimonides, also in the yeshiva, the famous yeshiva of Cordoba, which we discussed in the previous course. One of the students of the Rif, Rabbi Yitzhak al-Fasi, who was the teacher of Maimonides. All right, so it says in Bereshit, V'yomer Elohim, right? And God said, Na'aseh Adam b'sanmenu kidmutenu. We shall make man, or make a man, in our image, in our likeness. All right, we said image, likeness, not necessarily the best translations. We'll stick with that for now. V'yirdu bidgat hayam, right? And they shall dominate the fish in the sea, uva'of hashamayim, right? And anything, all the birds of the skies, uva behema, and all the animals, uvchol haaris, and the entire earth, uvchol haremes haromes al haaris, right? And anything that walks on the earth. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'salmo, and God created man in his Tzelem. B'Tzelem Elohim bara oto. Says in the image of God he created him. So he created man in his image. By the way, notice that here it says Vayivra, and over there it says Na'aseh, we shall make, and here it says that he created, not made, he created man in his image. B'Tzelem Elohim bara oto. Zachar unkeva bara otam. He created them male and female. First of all, who is God talking to when he says, Na'aseh Adam, we shall make man? I mean, up until now, God is talking to, we can say, talking to the angels, right? Or God said, let there be light. God said this. But over here, it says, Na'aseh, in plural, we shall make man. B'salmenu, in our image, in our likeness. All right? So who is God talking to? What is in our image? So
It could be,
image,
it could be, there are 2 opinions. I'm sorry, I'm without a camera. I'm a little bit sick. I don't just
to himself.
That's how I look. So there are 2 opinions. It could be that he's talking to angels because sometimes he has an advice from them. And the second opinion that he could say as like all the previous 5 days of creations, he Elohim, Hashem, he did it with the earth. And when the human was made, it was with Adama, right? He did it from the dust, like from Adama, and then he did like gave him a spirit through his nostrils. It's like
you raise a good point. If you realize throughout the previous chapter, or the first chapter of creation, God commands the earth to do things. He commands the earth to bring forth vegetation. And so you could say, with the help of the earth, he does things. But over here,
Right.
he's
And
talking
then
with a
animals.
group of people, basically saying that whatever this Tzelem is something that's in common with man, with God, and with some other beings. Let's call them angels for now, as you suggested. All right, so first of all, what is Tzelem? I explained what Tzelem was before, but here we'll actually see the definition. This is the first chapter of the Guide for the Perplexed. He actually defines the word Tzelem. Omnam Tzelem hu nofel ala surah hativ'it. Right, so this means he calls it the natural surah. So what is it, surah? It's surah in the language of the philosophers.
Shape.
It's shape in modern Hebrew, but in philosophy, it means the essential aspect, the characteristic of something. Right?
Right.
If you
Tzelem
remember,
is not
we said
necessarily
previously.
image.
Sorry?
I think Tzelem is not necessarily image. It's maybe a wrong translation into English. It doesn't mean image. Tzelem means the essence, exactly what
Right.
it
So
says.
so Tzelem means the essence, the essential character of something. Right. So if
Right.
we brought the example of a table could be made of wood, it could be brown, it could be plastic and white, it could be have all sorts of different characteristics to it. None of these characteristics is what makes a table a table. What makes a table a table? Well, we'll say whatever it is that makes a table is, we'll call the Tzelem of the table, the surah of the table. So, for instance, that it's elevated at a certain height and it has like a flat top that you can rest things on. That makes a table a table. So it says here, רצונו לומר, על העניין אשר בו נתעצם הדבר, והיה מה שהוא. Right? It is the characteristic which makes something that thing. והוא אמיתתו. Right? מאשר הוא, it's a little bit difficult language. מאשר הוא הנמצא ההוא, שהעניין ההוא באדם. So what is this essential characteristic in man? הוא אשר בעבורו תהיה השגה האנושית. It is that part of man with his, what we call his human intellect. Man's intellect is what makes man special, what makes man man. ומפני ההשגה הזאת השכלית, and because of this intellectual capacity of man, it says, בצלם אלוהים ברא אותו. Right? He was created in the image, or in the Tzelem, the surah, the essence of God. So we're going back a little bit to the previous last week's class, right? Says nefesh kol basar isurato shenatan lo ha'el. This was one of the halachot that we studied last week. The essential characteristic of every living creature is his nefesh, the nefesh of every creature, right? What makes a dog a dog? Well, it's defined in his nefesh. We said the nefesh. Does anyone remember what the nefesh is? So the nefesh is like the software or like the operating system of the body. So a dog has a special nose, he has special ears, and the software behind it that tells the dog's brain how to process what he smells and what he hears is what makes the dog a dog. So it says, every living creature has a nefesh. And that nefesh is what defines what the purpose or the function or the essence of that creature is. And with man, it says, v'hadat hayetera hamisruya benafsho shel adam hi surat ha'adam hashalem beda'ato. right? And this extra, he says, this da'at yetera, not just da'at, this extra da'at that can be found in the nefesh of man, specifically of the nefesh of man, is the essential quality of man, but not just any man. He's surat ha'adam hashalem beda'atu, who has perfected his mind, who has reached some sort of intellectual or mindful maturity. We'll put it that way. So it's not necessarily every human being. It says ve'al surah zu ne'emar b'Torah na'aseh adam b'salmenu kidmutenu. Says, and on this essential quality, for now we'll leave it at intellect, but as we progress in this class, we'll see it's not that clear that it's just man's intellect, right? But on this quality, this essential quality, is what the Torah says: we shall create man besalmenu kidmutenu. Klomar, meaning שתהיה לו סורה היודעת ומסגת הדעות שאין להן גולם, right? That he shall have some sort of capacity, some sort of ability to comprehend things that are abstract, right? Surah yodat, can know, ummaseget, and understand, comprehend. Hadeot says, for now, hadeot is the intellect, like intellectual things, she'en lahem golem, that have no physical form to them. Things in the abstract. And here he brings an example, kemo hamalachim, such as the angels, which we spoke about in the second chapter. Shehem surah belo golem, right? Which are a surah, in essence, with no physical being attached or associated with them. Ad sheyidme lahen, until he can be, until he resembles them. What does that mean, until he resembles them? Well, it says, Na'aseh adam b'salmenu. B'salmenu, that's Surah Yodatu Maseget HaDeot She'en Golem, is the capacity to comprehend and understand the abstract, or things like the angels. Ad she'yidme lahen is kidmutenu. Likeness means until we can resemble them. What does that mean, until we can resemble them? How do you resemble a malach? Well, we'll see that. We'll see later on in this chapter. ואינו אומר על צורה זו הניכרת לעיניים, שהיא הפה והחותם והלסתות ושאר רושם הגוף, שזאתו הרשמה. Right? So when he says בצלמנו כדמותנו, he's not talking about our physical characteristics, our nose, our mouth, because all this would fall under the definition of the word to'ar, not tzelem and not demut. But then he would say נעשה אדם בתארנו, which he didn't say. He said בצלמנו. ואינו הנפש המסויה לכל נפש חיה, שבה אוכל ושותה ומוליד ומרגיש ומהרהר. Right? We said that the nefesh of every living creature has different functions, such as eating and sensory perception and all that. Right? So when it's talking about the Tzelem, it's not talking about any of these other functions of the nefesh. Ela hadde'ah, she's surat nefesh, but it's talking about the knowledge / intellect of God, which is the essence of the nefesh. ובשורת הנפש הכתוב מדבר בצלמנו כדמותנו. And this is what the Torah is referring to when it says בצלמנו כדמותנו. And we said sometimes פעמים רבות תיקרא זאת הצורה נפש ורוח. Sometimes it'll itself be referred to as nefesh. The Tzelem Elohim will be referred to as nefesh. It'll be referred to as ruach. Today, most people refer to it as the neshama. But these are all different words, which each one has its own precise nuanced definition to it. However, sometimes they're used interchangeably. Sometimes we'll say neshama, talking about the Tzelem. Sometimes we'll say it referring to the nefesh. Sometimes we'll say it referring to the ruach. But the Tzelem Elohim, we need to understand is, first of all, we're talking about this extra da'at that is man's nefesh. ולפיכך צריך להיזהר בשמותן שלא יטעה אדם בהן. Therefore, you need to be careful when you're coming across these terms when studying Torah to know, according to the context, is it talking about the nefesh? Is it talking about the neshama? Is it talking about the tzelem? All right? So don't get confused. First of all, be aware that sometimes these words are used interchangeably in the text of the Torah. Okay, now, so the Tzelem Elohim, right? As far as we understand now, is basically it's a function of man's intellect, intellectual capacity. And the Rambam, he wants to point out something. This is a special note that he writes towards the end of the guide for the perplexed. He says, "Hello be'arti lecha. I have already explained to you. Shezeh ha'sechel asher shafa alenu me'Hashem yit'aleh hu hadibuk asher benenu ubeno." He says, this intellect, this mind that God bestowed upon us, says shafa alenu. Remember when we were discussing the shefa, the overflow of water. Right, God's we call it God's inspiration is resembled to an overflow of water, and remember we were talking about in the second chapter about the different levels of reality. We say God overflows into one level and fills it up. Remember the whole parable of the bucket system. He says, so this intellect, which God has overflowed onto us, says, "Hu hadibuk asher benenu ubeno." This is the connection between us and God. V'hareshut netuna lecha. It says, and you have the freedom to choose. Im tirse lehazek hadibuk hazeh ta'aseh, ve'im tirse lahalisho me'at me'at ad shetafsikehu ta'aseh. He says, you have the capability to strengthen this connection and to thin the connection. So remember we said there's like an overflow into the bucket system, right? And that fills up, right? That's the hayot, and then they overflow downwards into the ofanim and into the seraphim and into the Elohim and the bnei Elohim, all the way until it gets down to the 10th lowest level, called the Ishim, and the Ishim, they overflow from their knowledge and their mind onto man. And he says, but this pipe, so to speak, connecting us with this knowledge of God, it's not a fixed, doesn't have a fixed radius. It's you can make it bigger and you can make it smaller. It's not either you have it or you don't. It's how much of it do you have? It's like a volume knob. You can have more and you can have less. And you can control how much of it you have. It says you can strengthen this connection and you can weaken it. You could even completely turn it off. ולא יתחזק זה הדיבוק רק בהשתמשך בו באהבת השם. Says, and how do you strengthen this connection to God? It's by using your intellect for the purpose of the love of God. And what is the love of God? It's to study and to understand God, however you can, whether studying Torah or studying science, anything that brings you closer to the understanding of God is strengthening this connection between you and Him. Right? And your intention should be towards knowing God on a deeper level. וחולשתו, how do you weaken it? תהיה בסומך מחשבתך בדבר זולתו. בדבר זולתו. How do you weaken it? By distracting your mind with other things. Meaning you can be studying, you can be using your iPhone, your smartphone, social media and Facebook, and it all depends on your intention and what you're doing. You can be using it to have access to all these great documentaries on Netflix and interacting with other intellectuals online and trying to get a better understanding of how the world works and how God provides in His world and how God leads His world. Or it could be just, scrolling randomly and wasting a lot of your time and capacity on useless things, and those things weaken that connection. So the Tzelem Elohim, the image of God, is a function of man's intellect, not just his intellect, not his capability, but more of his actually acquired knowledge of God. And this thing is not either you have it or you don't, right? You can have more Tzelem Elohim, and you can have less Tzelem Elohim, and you can have none. You can have Tzelem Elohim and lose it. You cannot have it at all, as we'll see soon, and acquire it. And you can have more of it and you can have less of it. And you can control how much of it you have. It's all in your control based on your intention and what you do with the intellect that God gave you. So, is Tzelem Elohim something that we're born with? If it's something that you can acquire and or lose, is it necessarily something that's passed on genetically? Is it something that you're born with or biologically? Because let's say it is, and you lose it. Then does your offspring after you also not have it? So the 7th chapter of the guide, it defines the word yeled or yalad, right? Birth. It says ha'inyan hamuvan mizot hamilah yadua, right? What the simple, basic meaning of this word is no, v'hu aleda, that's giving birth. V'yaledu lo banim, right? And he gave birth to sons. V'hu shala od lechidushe hamachshavot. He says, however, this word was kind of adopted for another meaning, and that is giving birth to an idea, meaning not just biological birth, but Albert Einstein came up with the theory of relativity. So say he is the father of relativity, and anyone studying that topic is like the intellectual son of Albert Einstein. Says, as it says, and he gave birth to a lie. What does that mean? He gave birth to a lie. He made up a story, and people believed it, and they followed this, and he was the father of this false idea that people adopted. Right? And there's another pasuk that says, among the children of the Gentiles, all right, they shall follow. What does that mean? The children, this is not b'de'otehem, they shall follow their customs, they shall follow their behaviors. כמו שתרגם יונתן עוזיאל עליו השלום בפירוש זה, ובנימוסי עממיה אזלין. They follow in their customs, in their habits. ועל זה העניין, and in accordance to this interpretation of the word ילד, מי שלימד איש עניין אחד והועילהו דעת, כאילו הוליד האיש ההוא, באשר הוא בעל הדעת ההוא. Says somebody who educated someone and gave them da'at, gave them understanding. Says it's as if he birthed that person, because he is the father of that idea. ובזה העניין נקראו תלמידי הנביאים בני הנביאים. Right, and that's why the students of the Nevi'im are called the sons of the Nevi'im. They're not the biological sons of the Nevi'im. They go to the school of the Navi, and the Navi becomes like their father figure, and that he is now educating them. He says, this chapter we are discussing the word Yeled. There's another chapter where we'll be discussing the word Ben, son, and I will go deeper into this idea in that chapter. ובזאת ההשאלה נאמר באדם, and according to this use of the word Yeled, not biological but intellectual, as a teacher, it says, ויחי אדם 30 ומת שנה, and Adam lived 130 years, ויולד bidmuto kisamo, and he gave birth in his image and his likeness. So what does that mean? Adam Harishon was created by God with the image of God. However, only at the age of 130 did he give birth to a son that also had the image of God. He already had two sons previously, right? Cain and Heaven. But the Torah says that man lived 130 years and then gave birth in his image. Right, in the first chapter we already discussed what the image of God is. It says, and all of his previous sons before Seth, who was born at the age of when Adam was 130 years old, his third son. It says, all those sons that were born previously, they did not live up to their human potential, their full capacity. They did not have this Tzelem Elohim. Not just is Tzelem Elohim not biological, but even the first man created with Tzelem Elohim didn't give birth, didn't bring sons with Tzelem Elohim. Right, so his two previous sons did not acquire this image of God. However, right, the third son, כאשר לימדהו והבינהו ונמצא שלם השלמות האנושי, אמר בו ויולד בדמותו כשרו. However, Shet, right, after Adam educated him and taught him, and he reached his call it his human perfection by enriching his understanding, only then does the Torah say that Adam gave birth in his image. Meaning he didn't give physical birth in his image, He passed it on by educating, by raising a student who happened to be his son to have this image of God. And you already know. כי כל מי שלא הגיע לו זו הסורה, אשר ביארנו עניינה, הוא אינו איש. Says, and you should know. So what is the status of someone who doesn't have this image of God, this Tzelem Elohim? He says, you should know that anybody who doesn't have this Tzelem Elohim, which we have discussed, is not man. He's not human. He looks like man. He's physically exactly the same as man. Aval behema, he's just another animal. He's an evolved ape. He's not a man. Aval behema al surat ish v'tavnito. It's just in the shape of man. He looks like man. He has a flesh of man. Or more precisely, man has the exact same flesh as the animals. We're just further evolved in the animal kingdom. Our further development isn't what makes us an ish, a man. It's our Tzelem Elohim. Aval, furthermore, יש לו יכולת על מיני ההזק וחידוש הרעות, מה שאין כן נשאר בעלי חיים. Says furthermore, he has the potential to cause a lot of harm and bring a lot of destruction, which the rest of the animals don't have that capability. כי השכל והמחשבה, because the mind, man's mind, his intellect, שהיו מוכנים לו להגעת השלמות אשר לא הגיע. Right? So this mind that man has, which by the way all man has, right? Which God gave us in order to acquire this perfection, in order to acquire this knowledge, but he didn't. ישתמש בהם במיני התחבולות. He'll use this mind that he has. He'll think about how to plan a heist, how to plan an attack, how to bring destruction to the world. He'll use them, for all the wrong things, meviot lara, that bring evil in the world. Veholid nizakim, and he will bring destruction. Ke'ilu hu davar yidme la'adam o yihakehu, as if he's something that resembles man, and he mimics and imitates man. However, he brings destruction to the world. And so was man previous to Seth. Right? He had Cain in heaven. He was a murderer. Cain was a murderer. And the Midrash says, כל אותן ק"ל שנה שהיה אדם נזוף בהם היה מוליד רוחות. Says, those 130 years that Adam, right, since he sinned, right, and it was disgraced and banished from the Garden of Eden, until he had Seth at the age of 130, he would give birth to ghosts. What does it mean, ghosts? He says, no, it's people without Tzelem Elohim. Retzono lomar shedim, right, demons. What is a demon? A demon is a person without Tzelem Elohim. That's what a demon is according to the Rambam. Right? So when you read Midrashim that talk about demons, it's talking about destructive people who have no Tzelem Elohim, who have no image of God. Right? But when he made teshuvah, when Adam made teshuvah and came back and was back in the grace of God, holid bidmuto kisamo, then he gave birth through education, right, in the image of God. Vehu omro, and this is what the Torah says, Vaychi Adam shirushim u'mat shana, right, and man lived 130 years, Vayoled bidmuto kisamo, and he gave birth in his image, or in his Tzelem, and in his likeness. Wait, but we said that the image of God is this extra intellect that God gave man. And we see that you could have these great intellectuals and they'll be considered demons and not man. They will be considered people devoid of the image of God. How does that fit in? So is the image of God man's intellect? Because man's intellect, as we saw, if you look at Nazi Germany, they had some of the top scientists in the world. Well, we say, if you study science, right? Science is a way to come close to God. And they used their science to create rockets and missiles, right? They were the inventors of the rockets. Later on, that same science was utilized to make rockets that fly to space and land on the moon and orbit Earth and the solar system to deepen our understanding. However, the original rockets were built by the German scientists in order to bring destruction to the world. So, did these German scientists have the image of God? Or we'll give an opposite the other way. Albert Einstein, theory of relativity, right? Came up with the great, most famous equation in physics: E equals mc squared, right? Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Basically saying that all mass has a tremendous amount of energy in it. And his science really developed, and it was L'Shem Shamayim, right? For the sake of science. And then comes the Manhattan Project and says, wait a minute, does that mean that if we can break apart an atom, it'll bring this huge explosion and that can destroy cities? Right? So his intention was to further develop science, and there's a lot of great technologies that we have today that are based on this equation. However, it was taken by others to bring destruction to the world. So we see it's not just the intellect itself which defines or characterizes man as having the image of God or not. It's what you do with that intellect. Because two people on the same intellectual level, one could be considered a shed, a demon, and the other one can be considered as an ish, as a person with the image of God. And I will see a halakha that brings this concept into law. It says, "Kashem shehayav adam lelamed et beno, kach hu hayav lelamed et ben beno." Right? The law says, the halakha is that a man needs to teach his son Torah. He needs to educate his son. It says, but the same way that he is obligated to educate his son, he also needs to, he's also obligated to educate his grandson, his son's son. Shneimar, as it says, V'hodatem levanecha v'ivnei banecha. Right? You must teach the sons and your sons' sons and your grandchildren. It says, V'lo beno uben beno bilvad. However, this halakha doesn't just apply to your son and to your grandson. אלא מצווה על כל חכם וחכם ישראל ללמד את כל התלמידים אף על פי שאינן בניו. Right? There is a mitzvah of any hacham, any intelligent student of the hachamim, right, who knows Torah. He is obligated to teach all the students. any student he can teach, he has an obligation from the Torah to teach them. Even though they're not his son or his grandson. Shene'emar, as it says, Veshinantam levanecha. But the pasuk says, and you shall repeat this and teach this to your sons. So wait, he said the halakha doesn't just apply to your son, and the pasuk that they're bringing to prove this is it says Vishinantam levanecha, right? That you shall teach this to your sons. It says Mipi Hashemu ala medu, says the tradition that we received, the explanation from Moshe that we received regarding this pasuk is Banecha elu talmidecha. Says your sons means your students. When it says Vishinatam levanecha, it means you have to teach your students Torah. Shatalmidim keruim banim shene'emar vayesu bnei haneviim. Right, that the students are called your sons, and we see this vayesu bnei haneviim. Right, that the sons of the Nevi'im went out, and we know it's talking about the students of the Nevi'im. Okay, so imken, if so, lamani stava al beno val ben beno. But we said at the beginning, you shall teach your sons and your grandsons. So if vishinantam levanecha is talking about all your students and not just your offspring, then why does it say vishinantam vayvodatam levanecha ulivnei banecha, and your sons and your sons and your grandchildren? It says lama nistava beno val ben beno lehagdim beno leven beno uben beno leven havero. He says it's a matter of like first serve. It says first you have to teach your son. That's your number one priority. If you can only teach 3 people and you have two children, you teach your 2 boys and a third person. It says if you can only teach 1 person, you teach your son. It says first you teach your son, right? You're first obligated to educate your son and his sons, right? First your son and then his sons, and then the son of someone else, ben haviru. It's just a matter of priorities. But if you're capable of teaching many, then you have to teach whoever it is that you can teach. Any questions up until here? Okay. So we see that giving birth in the Tzelem Elohim isn't necessarily a physical birth. Tzelem Elohim isn't something that's passed down genetically or biologically. It's something that needs to be acquired. Even Adam did not naturally have kids with Tzelem Elohim. Only once he educated Seth had Tzelem Elohim. Right? His previous sons didn't. By the way, there's a mahloket here. Sefer HaKuzari, Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi says Hevel did have Tzelem Elohim, but they both agree that Cain did not have Tzelem Elohim. So regarding it being biological, they both agree. There's a consensus here that it's not passed down naturally. It can only be passed down through education. So what does this mean? That what is this da'at then, which is the essence at the core of Tzelem Elohim? If it's not man's intellect, which we maybe understood at first, but then we saw that the intellect could also make you a demon, and everybody has this intellect, and the Tzelem Elohim isn't something that everybody has. So it's not. So what is this da'at that the Rambam is talking about? So he said, I'm going to skip a bit. We go to Ilchot Deot, the laws of Deot. What is Deot? First chapter, first halacha in Ilchot Deot. It says Deot harbe yesh lekol echad ve'echad mibnei Adam. Right? Everybody has different Deot, which modern Hebrew we would understand opinions. V'zu mishona mizu v'l'hakam emenu beyoter. Right? And they're very diverse in their deot. Everyone has very different deot, and they could be very extreme. And now he's going to detail what these deot might be. Yesh Adam, there is someone, there's a person, Shubal Hema Koes Tamid, right? That he's always very angry. V'yesh Adam sheda'ato miyushevet alav ve'eno koes klal. And there's another person he has a more settled mind and he never gets mad. Ve'im yichas, and if he gets mad, yichas kas mad bekama shanim. Once in a few years, he'll get slightly angered or irritated. Right? These are two opposing deot. V'yesh Adam shu gevalev beyoter. And there is someone who is extremely arrogant. V'yesh hu shefal ruach beyoter. And there's someone who is extremely humble. V'yesh hu ba'al te'ava lo tizba nafsho ma'aloch beta'ava. And there's someone who has a very strong inclination, right, to food, and he'll never be satisfied. Bring him all the greatest foods in the world. V'yesh hu ba'al lev tahor. And there's someone who has like a pure heart. Lo yitaver afilu ledvarim ma'atim shaguf tzarich lahen. Right? That he doesn't have any inclination towards, he's not picky. He doesn't even feel hungry when he's hungry. So what are these deot? V'yesh ba'al nefesh rechava shelo tizba nafsho mikol mamon ha'olam. Right? There's someone who's extremely greedy. Right? ויש מקסר נפשו, שדיו אפילו דבר מעט, שלא יספיק לו. There's some people who they're so stingy even with themselves that they won't even put in any effort to make a living, just for his base needs. ויש הוא מסגף עצמו ברעב. There are those who will, they'll go into the deserts and they'll make themselves hungry and they'll fast. וכובס על ידו ואינו אוכל פירוטה משנו אלא בשר גדול ויש הוא מאבד כל ממונו בידו לדעת. There's some people who any money they make they go and they spend it on all these luxuries whether they can afford it or not. ועל דרכים אלו שאר כל הדעות, and so are all the other דעות כגון מהולל ועונן וחילאי ושוע ואכזרי ורחמן. Right, being compassionate or being cruel, being how do you call it? Amitz lev is courageous or being a coward. V'chayoseh bahen. All these different characteristics, the Rambam calls them deot. So, what is the Tzelem Elohim that the Rambam keeps referring to when he says Surah HaYudat, that can understand, comprehend, Umaseget HaDeot, right, which we thought was this knowledge of God, but we see when he defines what Deot are, these abstract Deot, we're talking about the characteristics of man. Behavior. In modern Hebrew, we'd say midot, the midot of a person. So it's this capacity to study God and understand God. It says, ad sheyidme lahen, right, to imitate God. In what way? Well, the better you understand God and understand how he behaves, and you're able to imitate how God behaves, and you behave you adopt that same behavior, that is a sign that you have Tzelem Elohim, the image of God. Because what it comes down to in the end is not if you have a doctorate in physics, but it's if you know how to behave properly with other people, the same way God does. I'll get back to this part over here. Another halacha in Hilchot Talmud Torah. V'chen harav she'eno holech b'derech tova. Right? If there is a rabbi that he misbehaves, he doesn't behave properly, af al pi she'chacham gadol, even though he is very wise and very learned, v'chol ha'am tzerichin lo, and the whole nation, they depend on him, because there's no other wise man and only he knows the law. En mitlamdin mimeno al shuvo lamotav. Right? You are forbidden from going to study from him until he corrects his ways. Shne'emar, as it says, ki siftei kohen yishmeru da'at v'torah yivakshu mipihu ki malach Hashem sevaotu. It says regarding your teacher, your rabbi, it says the lips of the priest yishmeru da'at, they hold, right, or they guard da'at, whatever da'at is, these de'ot that we saw. The Torah yevakshu mipihu, and they shall request Torah from his lips. Ki malach Hashem sevaotu, because he is the angel of God. Who? The rabbi, the teacher. Amru Hachamim. Hachamim said, Im harav domeh lemalach Hashem sevaot, Torah yevakshu mipihu. Says, if your teacher resembles a malach, like Yisiftei Kohen Yishmeru Da'at, the Torah yevakshu mipihu, and they ask, they request to study Torah from him, Ki malach Hashem sevaotu, because he is the angel of God. Hachamim say, if the rabbi, the teacher, is domeh, resembles a malach, then you ask to study Torah from him. V'im lo, and if not, al yivakshu Torah mipihu. Don't go request him to give you a devar Torah. So what does that mean? Domeh le malach, like we saw over here. Ad sheidme lahen, right? Right? Surah HaYodat, who knows, right, can understand these abstract concepts. What is these abstract concepts? Compassion is an abstract concept. If you're able to understand these things, this is like the Malachim. This is even the Malachim. Basically, what are Malachim? Malachim are these abstract concepts as well. Right? What they would call the god of fertility, according to the pagans. So that's what we would call maybe a Malach. It's an abstract concept. Maybe the god of compassion, or the Malach of compassion. Ad she'idme lahen, until he resembles them. What does resembling them mean? It means that you imitate his behavior, the behavior of the Malach, as opposed to the behavior of the Shedim. Right, so we started off this lecture with the first chapter of the guide for the perplexed, defining what is Tzelem, what is the image and the image of God. And this is the last chapter of the guide for the perplexed. So I like to say, if the first chapter talks about something, and the last you could look at the first chapter as an introduction to a topic, the last chapter as the summary, and you can understand from this that this is the entire intention of the guide for the perplexed, is to understand, in more depth, this one concept of what is the meaning of life, of man, of the image of God. And he brings this pasuk from Yirmiyahu. He says, Ko amar Hashem, this is what God says, A wise man should not take pride in his wisdom. Well, at first we would have thought, well, wisdom, man's wisdom, that's what brings him close to God. That should be the one thing that man should be taking pride in. And Yirmiyahu says, he says, don't take pride. A wise man should not take pride in his wisdom. Right? And a strong, a fierce man should not take pride in his, in being macho and being strong. And a rich man should not take pride in his wealth. He says this is what someone who wants to take pride in should take pride in. What? Haskel v'yadoa oti, right? Understanding, right? Gaining knowledge of me, meaning God. Ki ani Hashem, because I am God who does oseh chesed, mishpat, uzdaka ba'aris. Right? That I do justice and chesed, gemilut hasadim. I do good for people, and I do charity in the world. Because this is what I want, I desire. Right? Ne'um Hashem, this is the speech of God. And Maimonides comes to explain it. He says, he says, see how short, see how brief this phrase is, this text, and how perfect is the person who said it. And he says, this one phrase, this one verse, right, completely covers everything that we've been saying. This is chapter 54, the last chapter of the third volume of the Guide for the Perplexed. All right, there's 3 volumes. We started with the first chapter of the first volume. This is the 54th chapter of the third volume. And he says everything that we've been discussing is in this one verse. וזה שלא הספיק בזה הפסוק לבאר שהשגתו יתעלה לבד היא הנכבדת שבשלמויות. He didn't say in this verse that the greatest achievement of man is the knowledge and the understanding of God. כאילו הייתה זו כוונתו, because if this was his intention, היה אומר, כי אם בזאת יתהלל המתהלל, השכל וידוע אותי, והיה פוסק דבריו. Because if that was his intention, Yirmiyahu, he would have said, what should man take pride in? Haskel ve'yadoa oti. Says, knowing and understanding me. End of sentence. Okay, ani Hashem ehad. Or that I am one. Contemplate on that. Understand that. That is the highest level man can reach. For I am one. Okay, any timuna, I have no physical form. Right? You understand that? No, because it's not just about your philosophy or your philosophical understanding. Okay, in kamoni, there's no one like me, or something like that. אבל אמר שאין יתהלל רק בהשגתו ובידיעת דרכיו ותאריו, רצונו לומר פעולותיו, but it's not enough to just understand God, right? And understand how this world works, or how God, guides this world and leads it and provides for it. וביאר לנו בזה הפסוק, he explained to us in this פסוק, שהפעולות ההם שראוי שיודעו ויעשה בהם, that these actions, these behaviors that God wants you to do are chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah. Meaning, study the world through these glasses. how does what you are studying and understanding now, right, reflect God's Chesed, Mishpat, and Tzedakah, and emulate that, copy that behavior. ואחר כך השלים העניין ואמר כי באלה חפצתי נאום השם. This is what I desire. What does that mean? This is what I desire. It says רצונו לומר, right? What he's saying is that my intention שיצא מכם חסד משפט וצדקה בארץ. What does I desire חסד משפט וצדקה? Is I desire for you to do חסד משפט וצדקה in the world. As we already explained regarding the 13 midot, right? El, Rahum, the Hanun, right? The merciful, right? Erech Apayim, right? He's not hasty, he doesn't punish right away. Ki hakavana lehiddamot bahem v'shenelech an darkam. Right? The whole idea is for us to resemble and imitate these characteristics of God and guide our intellect into further perfecting these behaviors in ourselves. Right, so the intention of this pasuk, right, the human perfection which a person should take pride in, is to reach, your highest level of understanding God. Study as much as you can, understand as much as you can, deepen your understanding as much as you can. Viladat hashgahato bivruav, and to understand how God provides for his creatures. Behamtziyotam, how he keeps them alive, how he keeps the world going. Vanigotam echi. וללכת אחרי ההשגה ההיא בדרכים שהתכוון בהם תמיד לעשות חסד, משפט וצדקה, right? And to follow in these footsteps that God behaves in a way that you should always be, have the intention to always do more chesed, to do more justice, to bring more charity to the world. להידמות בפעולות השם, to resemble God's actions. All right? So, the image of God is not biological. It's not passed down genetically. It can only be acquired through education. The same way that you can acquire it, you can also lose it. And the same way that you can only acquire it by being educated from someone who has it. And how do you know if someone has it or not? It's very easy. You don't need to understand his intellect. You just need to see how he behaves in the world, how he interacts with other people. Because that kind of person is only one who can actually educate you in a way to either give you or pass on or give birth to you, so to speak, in the image of God, or further deepen that image of God. And studying from someone who's corrupted or has his characteristics are corrupted, which is what the Rambam also refers to as a demon, well, maybe potentially he'll give birth to you as a demon and not as a malach. Any questions? All right, understood.
Sammy,
Yes.
so how about those people who does Kesed, Mishpat, and Tzedakah, but they are not Jewish? Do they have the image of God, or do they have to be Jewish and do these things to acquire, to classify as having the image of God?
Well, we see this image of God is not a function of being Jewish or not.
Okay, so everyone can like have it.
Right? We say, we say about the Gentiles that them not being Jewish does not deny them entrance into the world to come. We'll see later on that also your life, your eternal life in the world to come is a function of this image of God as well. But theoretically, anybody, if they're educated properly and they have proper behavior and characteristics, they have a portion in the world to come, and they have this image of God. So what's so special about being Jewish, you're asking? Well, we'll see that in the next week. We'll discuss that. Next week will be the topic.
Okay, thank you.
The uniqueness of the Jewish nation.
So, Sami,
Lens of the image of God. Yes.
Sami, if I understand you clearly, in other words, to acquire understanding of God, you got to study it and share it to your children and to others if you can. And they got to know you by your lifestyle, that's what I believe in.
Excellent.
And you have to show who you're about by being who you are, which means if you're about God, then by your action in different situations, you could show who you are about and what you are, if I understand it correctly.
Perfect.
Okay. And you also have to be willing to share, to give, to help others. And when you do acquire it, it's not for yourself, it's to share with others.
Right. So everybody is commanded to the best of their capabilities, one, to learn it as much as they can.
Yes.
And the more they learn and the more they understand, the more they're able to pass it on to others.
Yeah.
And teach it primarily to your own children and to their children. But if you can't teach it to others as well, then you are commanded to teach it to others as well.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Any other questions, anybody?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.